Alright, hey guys, how's it going? It is me, and let's post the stream here. Let's see, we're gonna be talking about market update and the appraisal thing. Okay, so streaming. Streaming timelines and process for low appraisal and streaming timelines and process for low appraisal in my opinion on the market. Watch here. Alright, submit. Make sure this is working. Alright. Close that. Alrighty. So I will get to my opinion on the market here in a moment. But first I wanted to talk about a topic that came up today with regards to a low appraisal. So we represented or represent a buyer, and we're in contract to purchase a property, and we're successfully passed inspection, and we just got the appraisal back, and the appraisal came in low. And the question came up, what is the process? So what is the what are our buyer clients' options? Are there certain deadlines? How does it all work? The first thing to remember is that the purchase and sale agreement does contain a built-in contingency on satisfactory appraisal if you've specified a loan. So if the purchase and sale agreement includes a loan, so it's not an all-cash deal, then it automatically includes a appraisal contingency. And I did bring up an RE21 here. So if we go into the financing section, so here we have the new loan proceeds. So in this section right here we have here, if an appraisal is required by the lender, the property must appraise at not less than the purchase price. So that is the contingency. And if there's financing, they're going to require an appraisal. It's pretty much just every loan, it's true, right? So if an appraisal is required by the lender, so if there's a lender, that's always true, the property must appraise at not less than the purchase price. So thus, the contingency is established. Now, the language goes on to read, if the property doesn't appraise at the purchase price, the earnest money shall be returned at the buyer's request. So if the appraisal comes in low, the buyer's earnest money shall be returned at the buyer's request unless the seller at the seller's sole discretion agrees to reduce the purchase price to meet the appraised value. So if the appraisal comes in low, the buyer's entitled to get their earnest money back unless the seller agrees to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value. However, it goes on to say here that the seller shall be entitled to a copy of the appraisal and shall have 24 hours from receipt thereof to notify buyer of any price reduction. Um, and that concludes this section. It goes on to talk about the buyer has the right to get a different type of loan if they want. That's a separate topic. This topic, that highlighted area, is all regarding the same topic. It then moves on from there to talk about other stuff. So this is all we have to go on with regard to when an appraisal comes in low. So let's read it again. If an appraisal is required by lender, the property must appraise at not less than the purchase price, or buyer's earnest money shall be returned at buyer's request, unless seller, at the seller's sole discretion, agrees to reduce the purchase price to meet the appraised value. Seller shall be entitled to a copy of the appraisal and shall have 24 hours from receipt thereof to notify buyer of any price reduction. So that's the time frame. The time frame is 24 hours from receipt of a copy of the appraisal. So we write an offer, we get into contract. We successfully get past inspection, we order the appraisal comes in low. Does the buyer immediately have the right to just walk? No. In fact, we have to give the seller a copy of the appraisal, one, and then the seller has 24 hours after we give them a copy of the appraisal to decide whether or not they're going to reduce the purchase price to meet the appraised value. So if the seller does that, if we give the seller a copy of the low appraisal and within 24 hours they agree to reduce the price to match the appraised value, then the buyer is obligated to proceed with the purchase. However, if the seller fails to agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value within 24 hours from their receipt of us giving them a copy of the appraisal, then the buyer has a unilateral right to just walk. They can say, hey, the appraisal came in low. We gave you a copy of that low appraisal Monday at noon. Tuesday at noon came and went. You had not agreed to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value by that deadline. Therefore, we have elected not to proceed. And the buyer can walk. They can get their earnest money back, and no cost, no liability. The buyer can go on their way. So buyers are fully protected in an offer that has a loan. Buyers are protected by the appraisal. The seller has the right, when an appraisal comes in low, to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value. And if they do that within 24 hours, then the buyer is obligated to proceed. If they miss that deadline, then the buyer can walk if they want. Now, we don't have to, and this is the important part. The part that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned to you guys is that the buyer has, the buyer holds all the cards. The buyer is in the position of power. So it does not go on. This language does not continue by saying, something like, it does not say something like, if the seller doesn't agree to match the purchase price, to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value, then the buyer has 2 days to make a decision and to give the seller notice of termination. And it doesn't say anything like that. It does not go on to address that. So what we have is, if the seller doesn't reduce the price to match the appraised value in the 24-hour period, we don't have to immediately say, oh, you didn't reduce the price, so we're terminating. There's no hurry, because in this case, our buyer clients, well, in every case, we happen to represent the buyer in this case, but in every case, whoever the buyers are, when the seller misses that deadline, the buyers do not have some type of window or deadline where they have to terminate the contract. Otherwise, they're stuck or they lose their earnest money. That doesn't exist. So if the sellers miss the 24-hour deadline, the buyers now have a unilateral right to terminate the agreement and just walk away, get their earnest money back, no cost, no liability whatsoever. And that right lasts in perpetuity, so it doesn't expire. So the sellers only have 24 hours to respond to agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value. But if the sellers miss that deadline, or if the sellers don't agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value within 24 hours, then the buyer has a right to terminate, and that right lasts forever. It lasts from the 24 hours and 1 minute forever. It'll be good for tomorrow, and the day after that, 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 and the day after that. So there's no deadline associated with the buyer's right to terminate. So if the sellers miss their 24-hour deadline to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value, the moment that deadline elapses, the buyers now have a unilateral right to terminate. That right lasts in perpetuity. Therefore, there's really no rush to terminate the deal or to wrap things up immediately. So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, because you are in a position of power, you have a right to terminate, get your earnest money back, walk away scot-free. Because you're in that position of power, and because that position of power lasts in perpetuity, there's really no need for us to rush to cancel things or to deliver ultimatums or anything. The sellers thought they were going to get a certain amount of money for the home. The appraisal came in low. Now we're asking them to take less. Let's give them a little bit of time to let that settle in. Presumably they're going to have the same appraisal problem with the next buyer. So let's, give it a little bit of time here and let the sellers come to the realization that it's probably best just to agree to reduce the purchase price. So to match the appraised value. So just because a seller may have missed the first 24-hour window does not mean that 48 hours or 72 hours or 4 or 5 days later we can't draft an addendum at that time adjusting the purchase price to match the appraised value and thus restore the transaction and move forward to a successful closing. So the way that you want to look at this 24-hour period is this is the window of time that the seller has to agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value, and if they meet that deadline and they do that, then the buyer is obligated to proceed. After that 24-hour period, the buyer can walk anytime they want, or there's really no reason at all why 48 hours or 72 hours that the parties can't later still agree to reach the same decision. So yes, it's been 3 days, but we both signed an addendum agreeing finally that the purchase price will be reduced to match the appraised value. And if you do that, the contract is restored and you can move forward to a successful closing. So, so when you're representing a seller, this 24-hour period is very real. Because if we get a copy of the appraisal, we have got 24 hours to send them over an addendum that says we agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value. If we're representing the seller and we meet that deadline, then that buyer is going to be obligated to proceed. If we're representing the seller, the appraisal comes in low, they give us a copy of the appraisal. 24 hours later, we have not given them notice that we are agreeing to reduce our purchase price to match the appraised value, then that buyer can walk. So when you're representing the seller, the appraisal comes in low, ask for a copy of the appraisal. Once you have it, realize that you've got 24 hours to reduce the price to match the appraised value, and if you don't, that buyer can walk. And our seller clients just need to be advised of that, right? So you don't want that timeline to elapse, have the buyer walk, and then have your client look to you like, can they do that? We're in contract. They can't just do that, right? Yeah, they can, and so you should advise them, right? So when an appraisal comes in low, you represent a seller. Remember, Steve said, go to this section and read this paragraph, and remember that you've got 24 hours. So that's 24 hours straight up. So that is weekends, holidays. It doesn't matter. So if a buyer's agent emails you a copy of an appraisal at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, then you have, and our client has, until 11 p.m. the following Sunday to agree to reduce the purchase price to match the appraised value. If you don't, the buyer can walk. On the buyer side, you don't really have to worry about this too much because the buyer's in the position of power. If they have the right to walk, then we can negotiate with the seller until we either reach a happy conclusion, or if we can't, it doesn't matter if it's 2 days or 4 days or 6 days. You can just cancel because the sellers missed this deadline. We now have the right to terminate, get our earnest money back, walk away scot-free, and that lasts in perpetuity. I guess that's it. I hope that explains that. It was a conversation today that probably lasted a good half hour, kind of walking through that. Again, we represented the buyers, and the key was, we wanted to make sure that that we didn't have some deadline that we were going to miss, because if we miss some deadline and now maybe our earnest money is at risk. No. In a low appraisal situation, the earnest money is not at risk at all. If the seller agrees in 24 hours to reduce match the appraised value, great. Then we proceed to closing. If not, we can take as much time as we want to negotiate, and if that's successful, wonderful. We'll proceed to closing. If it's not successful, hey, no problem. Our right to terminate lasts in perpetuity, so we'll cancel, get our earnest money back. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. So that is that topic. If you guys have questions on that, be sure to let me know, and I will cover those in a future stream. All right, so my opinion on the market. I've had a few, since I've posted this, I've had a few agents contact me and ask if I would do that one sooner than later, and I am happy to oblige. So I've got Paragon open here, and my opinion on the market is never going to be just it's never going to be anecdotal, where it's like, oh well, we got a bunch of deals in escrow, and things, we got a bunch of listings, and everybody seems happy, and so the market's good. I don't evaluate the market like that. I think the market is evaluated most appropriately by the numbers. So let's take a look at some numbers here, and we're going to focus on residential. And we're going to focus on solds. So we're doing sold properties in Ada County. And again, we could do Ada and Canyon, we could do the entire MLS, but the majority of our business is in Ada County. About 85% of our business is in Ada County. So let's focus on Ada County. So sold properties in Ada County, and let's go to closing date. So we're going to go to let's go to January to the end of January. Oops. So January to the end of January. And so let's just make sure, sold properties in Ada County, the first month of this year. So we have 11/7/24. And then let's put some format cells, and then number, no decimals, comma separator. Okay, and this is January, February through December. All right, 11/2/74, and then we're just gonna change. Oh, I see what I did there. That number looked really, really high to me, so now I know why. So we'll go back here, there. Okay, yeah, 693. Okay, so 693, and then we're going to bump this up to February, and we'll bump this up to February. Okay, and then we have 733. And all we're going to do here is we're going to grab some data points, and then we're going to do, we're going to map them out and get a feel for some trend lines. 983, and then we'll also do supply and demand analysis to get a feel for where we are. So one thing that's interesting is when agents or consumers, customers, clients, friends, family, agents, when people ask me, hey, how's the market? Hey, how's the market? Get that a lot, right? 1016. One of the first things that really needs to be established is, what are we talking about when you say the market? 1352. So when you say the market, because we have the market. So one thing we have is, are we talking about the local market? Are we talking about the national market? Are we talking, and I guess if it's the local market, which segment of it? Or are we talking about the national market? Or are we talking about the economy? And if we're talking about the economy, are we talking about the local economy, or are we talking about the national economy? Economy, or are we talking about the global economy? Oh boy. And I guess this would be more like that, would be better. All right. So, hey, Steve, how's the market? Well, okay. Are we talking about the local market? And if the local market, what segment? Are we talking about starter homes, mid-priced homes, higher-end homes, or are we talking about the national market? We see a lot of stats with, new home sales. New home sales down 8% year over year, or and so when you see an article in the national news, they're talking about the national market. And one thing that's really important is the local market and the national market are two way different beasts. In 2008, when the real estate bubble burst, the national market was just crushed, right? And and so was the Boise market. I mean, all markets were crushed, but there was varying degrees of how crushed they were. And so, there's segments of the national market, like Florida is a great example, where it was just total catastrophe. And it was a catastrophe in the Boise area market as well, but less so, right? So the severity of the downturn in Boise was much less significant than in some of the other more major markets in the nation. And honestly, when the 2008 bubble burst, Atova did pretty well. You guys might remember, or many of you will remember, that in 2009, right when everything was just in pieces, we actually bought our Boise office. So when a lot of brokerages were consolidating and getting smaller and cutting costs, Atova was doubling down, reinvesting, and investing into the market because we knew that future growth was going to make it all worthwhile. And so, just know that the local market, the Boise market, and the national market behave and function much differently than one another. Certainly, to a certain extent, the Boise market will follow the national market. If the national market is on fire and doing great, then the Boise market is going to be on fire and doing great. If the national market collapses, then the Boise market is going to collapse. But I believe that the Boise market is, to a certain extent, insulated from downturn because primarily, one, quality of life. So even when the markets are in turmoil, there is a general drive for people to want to flee the markets that are filled with struggle. And so crime and prices being unaffordable, so the cost of living, crime, cost of living, quality of life, those things are driving people out of our feeder markets to the Boise market, where the quality of life is a lot higher, where the cost of living is more affordable, and it's just all around a nicer, better place to live. And so whether the markets are strong or in turmoil, those general market dynamics remain. And so even in a downturn, I think that, and we know from experience, that the Boise market, to a certain extent, is insulated from that because people are still wanting to come here. Um, so, um, we'll come back, we'll talk about economy stuff here. Let's see, I want to go to the end of June, the beginning of June, 1355. And then we'll go to July. But yeah, I think that July. I think it's important that when somebody asks you, how's the market, one of the first things that you should ask them is, which market are you asking me about? Or at least tell them the framework of your answer. So, hey, how's the market? Well, as you can imagine, as a agent, I get asked that question quite a bit, and I can tell you, and then you tell them what you're going to talk about. So if you're going to talk about the local market, tell them. I can tell you that here in the Boise area, blah, or I can tell you that on a national level, blah. So either ask them what they're asking you, or if they are open-ended with their question, just give them the framework of what your answer is. 1285. Let me get the rest of these out here real quick. So September, $39.97, and then October, 11.22, and then November, 908. And then I just realized there's a little bit of a faster way to do this. I could just change this right there like that. Oh, we're not into December yet. So let's look up December of last year. 944, 944. And that would actually be like this. Okay, so we can map this now. So we'll highlight that stuff and we'll go to what version of Excel am I in? Data? No. Let's see. Home. Oh, I think I just right click on it. Maybe not. Okay. View, no, review data. I think it's in data, isn't it? I know it's not in formula. This page layout, no. Maybe it's in home. Graph. Wonderful, Steve. I think it's in home. People, you guys have probably already seen it. I'm just missing it. That's this table. What time is it? It's midnight. That is not helping me. Okay, let's do it the old-fashioned way. Graph in Excel. Select the tells you want to chart, insert, tab, insert tab. Okay, there. Insert, oh yeah, insert, that's not true. Insert table. Okay, that just made it a pretty table, which I don't care about that at all. So insert, oh gosh, that's right here, Steve. Okay, so this is a line chart. And then I don't really care which type. Alright, so there we go. So this is transaction count for the last 12 months. So we have strong December, or mid-range December, slower in January, a little bit busier in February, a little bit busier in March, a little busier in April. May got crazy. June about the same. July fell a little bit. August crept back up. Big drop in September. Back up in October a little bit. Back down in November. November is about where February and March was. March is there, February is there. So November's back to February, March territory. Now this is just pure transaction count, right? So market sentiment has changed. People will tell you now that the market's cooler, the market's softening, and that's true. Obviously, you can tell the market's softening. The thing I want to mention here, I was thinking about this earlier today, is that you have this the real estate market, both locally and nationally, the economy, both locally, nationally, and globally. These markets are dynamic. They're going to ebb and flow all the time. So you're going to have strong markets, you're going to have weak markets, you're going to have mid-range markets. The markets are going to be changing. And this is something I've been telling people a lot recently. Is in spring and very early summer, the tone of the market was completely different than it is now. The tone, right? So the market volume is pretty much in line with what you'd expect, ramping up in the summer, cooling down in the winter. So the actual market numbers are in alignment with what you'd expect. Seems pretty normal. But the sentiment, the market sentiment, the tone of the market is that it's way softer. And I think, personally, I think that that's a very, very good thing because you guys will remember, in spring of this year, there was like, the market was super, super hot. It was overheated, in my opinion. If you were if you had a buyer, this is not a year ago or 2 years ago. This is this spring, 7, 8 months ago. If you had a buyer and you were trying to find a home for 200 grand, 225 grand, 250 grand, good luck, because every home that was listed was getting two, three, four offers and selling in the first day or two. Every single one. So if you were had a buyer at a starter home price point, it was very, very hard to find a home. Everything was selling super quick. That's great if you're a seller, but not so great if you're a buyer, right? And so the market is out of equilibrium there, and that's not healthy. Good markets have a reasonable level of balance. So here's what I've been telling folks. What I've been telling folks is, look, markets are going to ebb and flow. The question is, what ranges are they ebbing and flowing? So look at 2006. So in 2006, the market is out of control, totally out of control. It's just insane, right? Prices are going up extremely fast. People are buying houses left and right. Anybody can qualify. It's a free for all. Market is insane. Okay, so way over here at one end of the spectrum. Then in 2008 and 2009, when the market collapsed, you have the opposite thing occurred. So we had '06, we had an insane overheated market, and then in '08, '09, after the market collapsed, we have like this totally crushed, depressed market. So we have insane amounts of volume, and then okay, yeah, now there's nothing going on. The pendulum swung a very, very wide distance. So really overheated to okay, totally crashed. The market is just done, right? And that's not good. I would much rather see the market swings be a narrower range. So we don't want, if what we experienced in the spring continued and it just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. In the spring, I was telling people, when people were asking me in the spring, hey, how's the market? I would say the market is really on fire right now, and I'm hoping that it cools off a little bit, because what we don't want to have is a repeat of 2008, right? We don't want the market to get incredibly insane way over here, only to have it be so crazy that eventually it collapses and it goes all the way down to just a horrible market. That's not healthy. These big, massive, wide-ranging swings are not good. Um, Now the market is going to change, right? So it's not like we can say, okay, the market is here now and it's here forever and it's perfect, it's balanced, and that's the way it's going to be. That's not the way that markets work. It's not the way that economies work. Economies and markets ebb and flow. What we want is ideally to have an ebb and flow in a narrower range, as opposed to this big sweeping range. Because this big sweeping range it's painful. It's market's on fire, it's crazy, everybody's going insane, to oh gosh, the market has collapsed, it's a total disaster. Insane collapsed. Insane collapsed. That is not healthy. That's not where we want to be. Much better to see it being, oh, it's a little bit overheated right now. Okay, it's cooled down. Oh, it's overheated. Oh, it's cooled down. So if we can keep that range a little bit tighter, that is going to be better. So, would I rather see right now today things being like they were in the spring, continuing to get hotter and more overheated, or am I grateful that things came back a little bit, and we're seeing a correction before things got to too far of an extreme? Yeah, I am very happy that the market has tapered off, and that we're seeing these swings happen in a narrower range. I'd much rather be here than here, right? This is insane. This is healthy. So, if we were seeing numbers like this, yeah, this is really these numbers that I just made up out of nowhere. This is probably more like how people feel right now. So consumer sentiment kind of feels like that, when in reality, the market is there. So people feel like that, but the reality is that. Feel, reality. Feel, reality. So it is interesting, very interesting dynamic. So I think when people ask you, hey, how's the market? I think the two things that you want to talk about is that you are pleased that the market has cooled off a little bit, because in the spring, what we were concerned about was the market continuing to get hotter and hotter and overheating like it did in 2006, 2007, before the real estate bubble burst. We did not want to see that again. We did not want to replicate a repeat of what happened there. So seeing the market come back a little bit now and cool off a little bit, is something that it might sound weird, but it's something that we're grateful for, because what it represents is that the market is doing what markets do. They ebb and flow, but we like to see that ebb and flow happen in a narrower range, where it goes to slightly overheated, back to okay, it's cooled off a little bit, slightly overheated, cooled off a little bit. Those narrower ranges are much healthier than, oh, the market's insane and oh, the market has collapsed. Oh, it's insane, it's collapsed. So seeing the market ebb and flow in a narrower range is something that we're grateful for. Also, it's important to note that we are in November at let's see, at our lowest, 908 November. So and then our highest is 1355. So if we go equals this divided by that, 67%. So if we take the highest transaction count month of 2018 and we compare it to the lowest transaction count month of 2018, it's almost 70%. 67% is what it works out to be. So 70%, our slowest month is still about 70% of what our busiest month was. Let's look at it in terms of our slowest month compared to an average of, so we have April, May, June, July. So let's look at the average of the last 12 months. So average of all these guys is 1,054. 908 equals that divided by that, 86%. So if we look at a 12-month average monthly transaction count, there's approximately 1,054 transactions per month. That's our average over the past 12 months. In November, which was besides February, so the most recent month is what we're trying to do here because it's the current market, right? So November, the most recently completed month, there were 908 sales, and that's 86% of the 12-month running average, which, given that we're in winter, is good. I mean, honestly, it reflects a pretty strong market. So consumer sentiment is that the market is softer and things are slowing down, and that's true. But the reality is that in November, which is typically one of the slower months of the year, we are still at 86% of the 12-month running average. And so that does not reflect a market that is in a free fall, or that has collapsed. That's not true at all. So the numbers don't really reflect the consumer sentiment right now. Now that's not to say that the market can't, go down. It's possible that consumer sentiment, because consumer sentiment's a very real thing. If people aren't feeling comfortable, and they want to, they don't want to move, they're trying to stay safe, they don't want risk, so they just kind of stay where they're at. Consumer sentiment can drive the numbers. Absolutely, it can. So, are we at risk of the market getting softer? I don't know. Who knows? That's crystal ball stuff, right? Only time can tell. I can tell you that we started feeling this consumer sentiment thing, I would say, back in August, and we had definite decline in December. October picked back up. November's holiday season. I'd really say here that to date, the consumer sentiment probably has not really caused a significant decline. I mean, I'm just not seeing that. Our November is stronger than our January and our February, and is pretty close to where our March was. So, okay, so there's that. There's that piece of it. Let's also take a look at supply and demand. So let's just look at the past 3 months. So let's go to November 30th of this year, and then let's go up a year, back a year, down. Okay, so there's the same date. We'll go back 1, 2, 3 months, and we'll go from, so this gives us 9, 10, and 11. So that's 3 months worth of data. So Ada County, let's do like 250 to 350 as a representation of our I don't want to say starter home price, but like the lower segment of the market. I could probably do 225 to 325 or 300. And I could probably even do 200 to 300. Okay, so let's just put the numbers here for right now. So this is the last 3 months of sales, Ada County, and that price point in the past 3 months. There's 1282. Let's do 300 to 500. We'll call that our mid-range. So this was 200 to 300. This will be 300 to 500, and that's 1320. And then here, let's do like 500 to 750. And actually, let's do 500 to a million. And that is 371. Okay, and now let's do the same thing, but let's get our active data. So 500 to a million, there's 346. And from 300 to 500, there is 967. And from 200 to 300, there's 439. Okay, that's all the data that we need to do a supply and demand analysis. So, yeah, that just seems really normal to me. It will be interesting to see to what extent consumer sentiment drives the market in 2019. And honestly, it's going to come down a lot to the economy. So if the economy is healthy, remains healthy, becomes healthy, I mean, it depends on what your perspective is, but if the economy is healthy in the spring and the summer, both locally and nationally and globally, then I would expect that that will really function as an offset to the negative consumer sentiment, and we'll see this same similar type of curve next year. However, if I think locally our economy is doing great, but we are part of a national economy and there's risk there. So if the national economy suffers, the local economy will be affected by that. And if we have an economic downturn coupled with this negative consumer sentiment, that could drive numbers to be lower next year. Certainly a possibility. Only time will tell. Conversely, the economy could be healthy. That could function as an offset to this negative consumer sentiment, and we could see the numbers be very similar to, or even perhaps better than last year. If things do go south with the economy, and coupled with consumer sentiment, that does drive the market lower, as I mentioned previously, remember that our market will be better insulated against those declines because people still want to come to Boise. So that's one thing that we really have here that I'm grateful for, is that kind of built-in insurance policy that says, hey, even if the markets really decline, there's still going to be a market that you can function in and do very well in here in the Boise market because of what Boise has to offer. Okay, so I have also brought up here the supply and demand analysis, and for location, we're just doing Ada County. For this first price range, we did 200,000 to 300,000, and other criteria, there was none. I don't do any. None. I'm only going to do the 3-month analysis here. So, number of homes sold was 1282. Number of active listings was 439. Interesting. Well, there you have it. At this starter home price point, there is still only 1 month's worth of supply in the market right now. So we have what 1282 homes that have sold in the past 3 months. That so 1282 divided by 3, 1282 divided by 3 is 427. There's an average monthly demand of 427 homes. Again, that's 1282 sold in the past 3 months divided by 3 months is an average of 427 selling per month. If there's currently 439 homes on the market and they're being consumed at a rate of 427 per month, then that's about 1 month's supply. Let's plug in the data down here. Let's copy and paste and paste. And here we're doing 300,000 to 500,000. I do have a little bit of overlap. I could have made this $300,001. It's not going to play any significant consequence in these numbers. So 3 months sold, we had 1320. Active listings, we had 967. So at this price level, we have about 2 months worth of inventory. And then down here, we did 500,000 to 1 million. And we have here 371 sales and 346 actives. So 3 months worth of inventory at the higher price points. So this is incredibly telling. This is incredibly telling, and it's very, very interesting to me that we have this consumer sentiment that is saying that the market is softer and things are slower and things are cooling off. However, these numbers show here's the scale. We have less than 3 months supply is considered a seller's market. 3 to 6 months supply is considered to be a balanced market, and more than 6 months supply is considered to be a buyer's market. So again, remember I had showed you guys numbers that were, whoops daisies. Let's go back. I lost my 700, 500, 320, and 228. So we talked about consumer sentiment feeling like this when in actuality the market's like that. So it feels like this, but really it's like that. Feels like this, really it's like that. So over here what we have is it seems like it feels like a buyer's market, right? Like there's lots of houses out there and things really aren't selling and the market is softer now. That's how people are feeling. But these numbers don't reflect that. These numbers reflect a seller's market where there's only 1 month worth of inventory at this price level based upon recent market data, based upon the last 3 months of sales and our current active listing inventory. There's only 1 month of supply at this price level, 200 to 300,000. 3 to 500,000, 2 months of supply, 500 to a million, 3 months of supply. So you could tell people, at the starter home price range, 200 to 300,000, we still only have 1 month worth of inventory. It's very much a seller's market. There's limited inventory and enough buyer activity to consume all that inventory in just 1 month. So there's only 1 month worth of inventory. That is definitely a seller's market at our starter home price point, 2 to 300,000. At the mid market, a little bit more of the middle range, 300 to 500,000. There's about 2 months worth of inventory. Still very much a seller's market. We don't see a balanced market until we get to 500 to a million, and there is no price points in Ada County right now where it's a buyer's market where we're seeing more than 6 months worth of inventory. We're just not seeing it now. However, with that being said, we do have a Our market in the Boise area is cyclical. We're busier in the spring, summer, and early fall, and we're slower in the winter. So these numbers could be skewed a little bit right now because of um, people taking their homes off the market for the holidays. So the last 3 months are what we have: um, August, September, October. No, September, October, November. September, October, November. Um, those are the last 3 months for our sales window. But our actives are between Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? And so if these active listings are artificially small because it's between Thanksgiving and Christmas, that could be driving some false conclusions over here. So let's double it. Let's pretend that we have what eight the 440 would be 880 minus 2, so 878. So if we double the active listings from what they are now to account for the fact that we might have a artificially low number of listings given the season, it still only drives us up to a 2 months worth of inventory. Let's do the same thing here. 967 twice. Um, let's just call that 2,000. So a little bit more than double. That takes us up to 5 months worth of inventory. That's still a balanced market. That's 3 to 6 months of supply. That's a balanced market. This is healthy. This is still a bit of a buyer's market. That's still on the unhealthy side, a little bit too hot. This puts us right in the healthy range. And then for our higher price points, if we double this, 350, we'll call that 700. That puts us at 6 months supply. That's still in the healthy range too. Still a balanced market. So if we double the inventory levels from their current amounts, we're still seeing a market that is either on the hotter side or in a balanced, healthy state. Doubling our inventory level doesn't even put us into this buyer's market territory, which would be considered to be a soft market. So it's an interesting time for sure. Consumer sentiment does not match actual market data. If we go by the market data, I would have to say that we're in a position where the market has. It's all relative, right? So it's weird because if consumers feel like back here in the spring when it was like insane, right? The market's hot and there's 5 offers on every listing. In comparison, relative to that insanity, now I can see how it could feel soft. So compared to the insanity that we had in the spring, sure, it feels like a soft market. It's like going from you're outside and it's 108 degrees and you walk inside to a building that has mediocre air conditioning and it's 85 degrees. Going from 110 to 85 feels wonderful, but it's still not the 72 degrees that you'd want it to be if the air conditioning was working really well, right? So it's the relative perspective, that our market now being a little bit more normal compared to the crazy spring that we had can feel like it's a soft market. So compared to our crazy spring, it feels like a soft market. But in reality, we're just back to a more normal market. So in any case, there's some food for thought. Hard to always predict, hard to ever predict what the future holds. But looking at the market data that we see right now, and given the fact that we are in Boise and that somewhat insulates us from significant um, national problems, I'm cautiously optimistic for 2019. We'll put it that way. Assuming that the national economy can hold itself together, I am cautiously optimistic for 2019. if the national economy does suffer, which is certainly a possibility, rates are going up. Um, that's another weird thing. It's like rates are going up, and everybody's like freaking out over the rates going up. Um, Rates going up, in my opinion, it's I'll get like people will take me out to the back and beat me for saying this, but um, rates going up is a good thing. It's hard because it makes it more challenging for you to get some of your buyers qualified. But rates going up is so rates going up gives our economists or our policymakers um, maneuvering room. So in 2008, one of the things that the government did to restore the economy was they kept lowering the rates, right? So the Fed funds rate kept going down, 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 and I think it was at zero for a while. The Fed funds rate is not the rate that people pay, but it's the rate that banks loan money to each other overnight. Um, but the Fed funds rate kept going down, 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 and the cost of money became more and more affordable, and that in turn stimulated the economy. And so when you have rates that are a little bit higher, what that does is it gives the government tools to use the next time there's a downturn. So if the Fed funds rate had dropped to zero and we're still at zero, and then there's another economic crisis, the government would have no tools to stimulate the economy. So rates creeping back up is like the government recharging its weapons. So it's like getting more ammunition. So as the rates creep up a little bit, the government has more ammunition to, if the economy falters, they can now lower those rates again to re-stimulate the economy. If we stayed at very, very, very low rates and the economy faltered, there's no room, there's no ammunition to stimulate the economy. So I think that raising rates or that rising rates are an indicator that the Fed has a measure of confidence in the economy and is using the strong economy that we have at the moment to recharge its weapons, essentially. It's a kind of silly way to look at it, but I think there's truth there. So I'd like to see, rates getting back. We don't want to see rates go to 8%, 9%, nothing like that. But I think seeing rates get back into the, 5.5, 5.75% territory is probably where we're headed. And I'd like to see things kind of balance out and stay at that level for a while, because it still makes, helps make financing affordable to have rates good, but it also gives room for stimulus should the economy falter. And, for better or for worse, if the goal is to keep the economy in a state where it's functioning well, the Fed having those tools available to them will help us keep the economy, for what it's worth, happy for as long as we can keep it happy. All right, so I will be talking more on the market in upcoming streams, but I wanted to touch on those 2 points tonight. I wanted to look at the transaction count, 12 months running. Again, we are looking at 908. Format cells, couple decimal places. So about 70%. Our weakest month was still 70% of our strongest month. And I shouldn't say our weakest month. November, one of the slowest times of the year, was still almost 70% of our strongest month this year, which was in June. So anybody that says that the market is just has collapsed is just not, it's not correct. Um, and we are, here's a better stat to use, 86%. So in November, November's transaction count is, which is one of our slower months of the year, is 86% of our average over the past 12 months. So not a significant decline. And we're seeing, I guess I don't have that data, but I think we had 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, that's right. So, and we're seeing, 1, 2, 3 months worth of inventory at our three different price levels, all still representing the seller's market. Even if we double those figures to accommodate for potentially low listing volume for the holiday season, even if we double those numbers, we still are in a seller's market for the lower end of the market, and then we enter a balanced market territory for the upper end. So the numbers are showing a healthy market right now. There's no disputing that. What the future holds, who can tell? But for now, there is some food for thought and some information for you to share with customers and clients that may inquire. I'm going to call it a night there. It's 12:40, and I will be streaming again tomorrow. I'm not sure what time, and I'm not 100% sure what topic. It'll be one of these things. We'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening. Call me if you need anything. Happy to help. All right. Bye-bye.